right, it's about time to get started, folks. Welcome. Thank you very much for attending. This is Deep Dive Microsoft Visual Studio Team Foundation Server 2010 reporting. Woohoo! So, thank you very much. This talk is one that I get to be passionate about. I watch a lot of TFS implementations around the world, get to see it, participate in the configuration, and so many of the times people get TFS in place, but they're using it just for version control, or version control and some bug tracking. And they don't expose the power of the reporting portion. And that's what I'd like to talk to you today about. How many of you are using TFS? Nice. How many of you are not? For those of you who aren't, I won't overview TFS because it's 300 level, but you've probably seen enough here at TechEd to go through that. So in this talk, we're going to cover several areas. And we're going to look at some of the built-in reports, but we're going to dive into creating custom reports, more importantly. Now, for those of you who are using TFS, how many of you are using the reporting features extensively? I mean, you're in there, you're looking at the reports, using them to manage day-to-day. Oh, not too many. Good. Well, I will get to show off some of the power then of what is the TFS reporting. This is what we're going to talk about, and this is my only slide other than the intro slide. Everything else leaves from here and goes to demonstrations. So right now we're in the midst of an introduction. We'll be talking about some existing reports. I'll dive into some SSRS reports and some of the portal pieces as well. I'm going to give a basic introduction to the warehouse and the cube and just kind of show how things are connected. Not do too much there, but just kind of highlight how the reporting works. We'll then generate some ad hoc reports in Excel. We'll move from there to generating those same Excel reports or similar ones through a nice feature of 2010, which allows us to generate them from a work item query. Work item queries are very easy to create and something people use every day. So we'll jump in and we'll do that next. Then we'll talk about hosting Excel reports up on SharePoint. So we can highlight what's up on SharePoint and how those work. We're going to create an SSRS report. That's a SQL Server Reporting Services report. And lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about Performance Point for reporting as well. That's a feature of SharePoint 2010 integrated, and it's a powerful tool for reporting against TFS. So before I get started, I want to do a little bit of hand waving of where the various pieces of TFS are. So we're going to start with TFS. There's a database in TFS which stores your team project collection. And you might have multiple databases storing team project collections. Periodically, about once every 2 hours, once every 6 minutes actually, by default, we're going to pull data from that and bring it into a data warehouse, a star schema data warehouse where things are archived. The data warehouse is a nice piece to report against, but it's not the end point. Every 2 hours by default, that data gets pushed into a multidimensional OLAP store. And that OLAP store is a really convenient way to dive in and get data, especially trending data. How many of you have ever worked with a pivot table? Pivot tables are one excellent way to access TFS, and we're going to be doing that. We're going to be doing that here today. So let's go ahead and get started. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk into some of the TFS reports that are available on SQL Server Reporting Services. These are the ones right out of the box. If you have a basic installation of TFS, you don't have the reports out of here. So I'm assuming no one has a basic installation here. TFS reports, here are some of them out of the box. Let's take a look at bugs. We can fire up bugs. We can look at something like bug trends. And it generates the report for us, and we can see some of these trends. Here you'll see the bug trends coming in and out. You can filter these by iteration, state, severity, etc. We can filter by all of these reports. And this is true of almost all of the SQL Server Reporting Services reports. Now, if I go and show some of the details, I want to talk very briefly now about some details. I'm going to edit that bug trends report. And if we look at the parameters, this is our first time when we can start to modify reports. So I've got this out-of-the-box report that doesn't work for you because you've renamed your bug defect. Right? You've made some process template customizations. You've done some kind of change. If you've done that, TFS 2010 provides some nice ways to get in and make some modifications. If we look down here, this bug report has something called bug name as a parameter. And I can go in here and actually change that to defect or whatever you've named your bug type. If you wanted to trend something else, you wanted to trend user stories, you could type user story in there as well. So that's the first level of customization. Right out the gate is you can open up SSRS reports and make a lot of different changes, as well as set some of the defaults. The interval is a 7-day interval. You can override that default, change that to anything you like, etc. So that's the first way to make some of those modifications. Let me talk a little bit more about the ones that are available. Builds. Day-to-day operations. If you have automated builds, I'm going to totally stress it. Automated builds are fantastic. They're one of the 3 pillars. I get a head nod over there. Tell me about automated builds. Why nod your head? Because it's great. Because integration sucks, right? It really stinks to have to integrate your code at the end of a 2-week, 1-month period. Continuous nightly builds, you get the feel for that integration. One of the 3 pillars of TFS. The first, version control. Second, work item tracking. Third, automated builds. You want those 3 to get the most out of your reporting. So we can look at things like build success over time and see how we've progressed with our builds. The build succeeded, we have no test runs. Here's where the build failed. We can look at this over time and understand our build reports. Something that, once again, I encourage you to do on a fairly regular basis. Project management. Burn down and burn rate. I'm going to see how you're burning down. And I want to highlight some of these built-in ones because they're important. Here's your hours completed. We have a little bit here. We're starting, iteration start date is on 6/4. I'm going to actually bring that down to 5/13. And we'll end that on 6/4. Oh, not 67/4. That's not going to work. June 4th. And you can generate that report. Now, this is a nice burn down report, so you can start to see how your team is delivering. This is all out of the box. Nothing new here. One thing that I'm inclined to do, however, is look at it not just from here, from the work item types task burn down, but look at the number of work items as opposed to the hours. Let's view the report again. This time, we're seeing the burn down of the tasks. There's kind of a conceptual difference between the two. If you're running a Scrum team or a team doing Agile, and you're inside of an iteration boundary and you're burning down, some teams like to track hours. Some teams don't. If you don't like to track hours, this is the way to do it. Do it the number of work items. Right? You don't get credit for your task until it's done, until it's checked into the repository. I kind of like that feeling. So I get to see what's done when I'm here. What's checked into the repository, what's ready to go. So that's another, just a concept that you can do. These changes can be made right here. And of course, we can also burn down things like user stories and see how user stories burn down by number of work items. So different ways of looking at it. This, by the way, would freak me out. Why would this freak you out? I haven't finished anything. But all my tasks are closing. What does that imply to you project managers? I'm closing down my tasks, but my user stories are not yet closed. Working on the wrong stuff. What's that? Not tested yet. Ooh, I like that one. That might be a legit reason if you're alternating tests between iteration. I like having it in the same, but it could very well be. What's another dangerous thing that this exposes? What was that? Lazy product owner. They're not looking at it and closing it out. Could also very well be. What's that? Ton of work in progress is another. In other words, people are multitasking all over the place. Tasks are closing down, but they're not working on the tasks to focus on closing business value. So this is another just interpretation of some of these reports. And I'm not going to go through all of the reports. We don't have enough time to do that. But there are several. Stories overview and stories progress are good ones. And I'm going to pop up stories overview. And I don't have great data here, but I have a couple pieces that are important. Right up at the top, you see 2 columns there. Those are the user stories I'm working on. And you can see the percent hours that are complete by each of those requirements. You can see the hours remaining and what types of tests are logged against these. If nothing else, this is a great report to get started with. I love this report. It shows me so many things. It identifies if there's too much work in progress. Thanks very much, Paul. It identifies if we're close to being done, burning through our hours. It identifies the quality. If I look at this top one, I've got 8 hours remaining, and I've got about 3/4 of my tests passing, some failing. But I've got bugs logged against it. And if you look at the other one, I'm out of time. I burned all of my expected time, but I've still got very many tests that are not passing or have never been run. So this is a great post to come in and just look at and make some determinations on how your project is working, how your project's running. Unplanned work, we won't dive into it, but I'll just mention it. Unplanned work is great. You can see scope creep. You can see what happens after you've started in your iteration and what's been added to the iteration and what's been cut out of the iteration. So you kind of get a delta over time. If you're a Scrum team, this is especially important because you shouldn't have a lot of stuff being added inside of an iteration. Some stuff cut out of an iteration is probably okay, but not added into an iteration. So those are the built-in, out-of-the-box reports. Let's take a look. If I go over to SharePoint, I can see another view of some of these reports. And this is a quality dashboard. You can see my test plan progress over here, my build status. You can see how I'm working as part of my development. So I look over here. Here's my test plan progress. Here's my build status, my build progress, bug reactivations. Why do I care about bug reactivations? What's that? Stuff's not getting fixed, right? It's a dev fixes it. Or a dev creates a bug. A tester activates a bug, sends it back to the dev. Dev goes in and codes up a fix, checks it in, marks it as resolved, goes back to that tester, and they go, nope, you didn't get it right. And they reactivate it. That's not as common as this one, however. Tester activates a bug, passes it to the dev, and the dev cannot repro. They resolve it, cannot repro, it goes back to the tester. I was listening to a Microsoft presentation when they were talking a little bit about this, and what shocked me was how long it took to get back to that bug. So if a developer cannot repro, and it's a high priority bug in DevDiv, it takes 40 hours to get back so that developer can start working on it again. That's a work week. They've delayed that whole push back. And if it's a lower value bug, it might never get looked at again, or might not get looked at until the very end. So those are some of those things that you really want to watch as bug reactivations. This is a fun one. Who here is using the testing tools? Microsoft testing tools? Have you been able to see this decline, your bug reactivations? Normally that's something you might be able to see as you see the bugs decline if you're using that. I'm going to move away from that and move into our next demo. It timed out. The thing timed out. So I'm going to have to come back after my cube is rebuilt. Don't have as much processing power on this machine as I would love to have. But let's jump back in and talk about our next demonstration. And that one's exploring the cube. And to explore the cube, I'm going to pop up the Business Intelligence Developer Studio. Visual Studio 2008 is what you use to connect to SQL Server 2008. And from here, we can explore it by creating a new project. And in this project, we're going to do an analysis services. We're going to import the analysis services database so you can see what that cube looks like and what are some of the things we can do with the cube. And I want to point it out because there are a few times when it matters. You generally don't mess about in the cube too much, but don't be afraid to either. right? It's not one of those things that you should be afraid of being in and making some modifications to, but just be wise about it. And I'll show you some of the areas to touch and some of the areas not to touch. So by simply pointing it at the cube, I'm able to reverse engineer the whole cube, and we can take a look at what it looks like. I hear people complain quite often, well, the cube only replenishes itself every 2 hours. It's only up to date every 2 hours. We want that to be instantaneous all the time. You can choke it down to be less and less time. But the cube processing does take a substantial amount of power on that machine. So if you're going to have it reprocess every 6 minutes or so, make sure you offload it off of your TFS server and put it somewhere else so that the gets and stuff can still be appropriate. Finish up that. And we can come take a look at our cube. And if I double-click the cube, it'll open it up. You'll see there's data sources here. We can edit those data sources. But most importantly is the view of the cube, the work item history portion of it. We can scroll over and view the relationships between the fact build details and the dimension build quality, and all of those relationships. I'm not going to spend much time here, but you can see all of these relationships against the cube when you look at it through this view. Instead, I'm going to move to the dimensions, where we can see some of the dimensions and how they relate to one another. We have dimensions and measures. So, quick piece on cubes. We have dimensions. That's how we want to slice our data. Show me by developer, by date. We slice 2 dices. And then we have a measure, what we want to show, lines of code. So show me the lines of code per developer per day. No groans, no nothing. That's an evil, evil, evil one. But you can do it. This is how these are related. These dimensions are related to the measure groups here. So you can come over and actually make modifications like the change set. If you wanted to link the work item change set to a date, you could do it at this point by exposing it and creating a relationship. There's many different types of relationships. We're going to do it based on the date, and we can set it up to the last update date to the date time. What this allows you to do is get pivot tables that now connect these pieces of data and expose more information. But maybe don't mess there. Instead, go mess in the KPIs section. KPIs are key performance indicators. We're not going to build one here because it does take a while to build. But a KPI, you could build one that says, let me know when the number of tests against each requirement drops below a number, drops below 2. 2 tests per requirement. Let me know. That's a red. It's yellow if it's 2 tests, and if it's 4 tests and above, it's a green, something like that. And you can build these KPIs and then consume them in SharePoint very, very easily. So that's where you might want to mess around inside of the cube. Any questions on the cube? I don't want to spend too long in the cube. Yeah, one question. Where are the good resources for the cube? MSDN has a surprising amount of good documentation that was released just recently. A guy at Microsoft named John Socioloja just recently published a thing on how to build some of these reports and how to interface with the cube. That does not tell you how to modify the cube or add KPIs. For that, you'll want to just pick up a book on analysis services, and that's probably all you need. A book on analysis services that dives into the cube and business intelligence. All right. That's a good question. Should you be familiar with the cube before you go poking around in it? Yes. Please do. Like I mentioned, the cube takes a lot of the processing power of TFS. It's where most of the load occurs, is rebuilding that. You know, checkouts, check-ins, they don't take much load, but rebuilding the cube can take a bunch of your processor time. You can make tweaks into the cube that dramatically increase that. So for instance, you have day granularity on your dates in the cube. If you move that to minute granularity, whoo! So just be cautious. The next area we're going to cover is to go into Excel and build a report. So we've covered some of the existing reports. We've covered the warehouse and the cube a little bit. Now we're going to build some ad hoc reports. And the reason I exposed the cube is so you can see that relationship. But now we're going to build some ad hoc reports. So in here, if you're inside of Excel, you can go to other sources and jump into Analysis Services and connect to the TFS server. This is the cube. You point this to the cube. And from there, we're going to catch the team system cube. How many people have heard the term team system? Woo! Absolutely. But it went away. The marketing, right? Except it's still here. So for all of you who are nostalgic about your TFS 2005 and 2008 days, at least it's still here. Let's tie that in. We now have connected to the cube, and all we're going to do is create a pivot table. When you point against the cube to create a pivot table, it's a very simple walkthrough, and I now have the pivot table. You can hand off this ability to most managers, because most managers have done pivot table type work against Excel. If they haven't, it only takes about a half an hour to 45 minutes to get them familiar so they can start spelunking around and get that data out themselves. That could be a good or a bad thing. Right? There's a lot of data in TFS. But let's pick out one of these things. So for this one, I'm going to specifically go in, and we're going to look at some of the work item pieces. So I'm going to go to the linked current work item, and I'm going to pull out some data that I wasn't able to get before. I want to know, for my requirements, first you better think of what you want to report on. For each requirement, I want to see the test cases that have passed and failed against that requirement. Notice that is a far different question than for each requirement, show me all of the tests that are currently passing or currently failing. That's the report I've already shown you. The reason you might care is because if you have 400 failures and one pass, it might make you nervous going to production. So I want to know, show me the history of that thing. What's passed, what's failed. So to do that, I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to go into my linked work items, and I'm going to grab the work item type. I'm going to filter by the work item type. I'm also going to filter by the iteration path. So I can kind of drill down into a couple specific areas. And then you'll see here I can do the filters. I'll filter on a user story. And I'll filter on my blog engine iteration 2. And the next thing I'll do is put in some rows. So I've got some title. We're going to go around and grab the title. Drop that into the row label, and here are all of my work items, my 4 work items. Next thing I'm going to filter this down to test. Now what I'm filtering here, just to make sure that I'm real clear, up here I'm filtering out pieces of the cube. You can have way too much data. If I show all of these things, there's just a huge list of things to pick from. So you can start filtering it out. I went to my linked work items. I've got my user stories. Now I want to go find my failures, and those are in test. So let me go into test. And from test, we're going to get the sum is our point count trend. Drop that down here. So that shows me my point counts. So you can see here I've got that together. Let's go back to this. And we'll go ahead and insert a bar chart, and we'll do a stacked bar chart. You can see we have some comments on the blog post. However, we're still missing one of our key pieces of data, and that right here this is just the total number of runs. I want to know by what. So I'm going to go into outcome, and that's in test result, grab my outcome, whoops. And now you'll see I've got a report that's maybe more useful. What's failing? What's succeeding? How many of you have built these types of reports? Quite a few. This is one of the easiest ways to start getting data out of TFS. The built-in reports are great. They get you on the road to starting to get the right data. But when you start pulling things out of Excel, you get this a massive amount of data. A massive amount. And TFS gathers it without the developers doing stuff and the testers doing stuff to physically say, this is what I did. You're not having to report all this stuff. So in other words, if I've got a user story with tasks associated with it, and I just check in some code against a task, boom. I now know how many lines of code it took to implement that user story. And Jeff Levinson has a tool. He's in the front here. He'll probably be coming up a little bit later. He's got a tool which will let you open up your user story and say, show me all of the files that were impacted by it. And then you can drop down to see all the files. You can highlight the files and say, okay, now back-end that to the other user stories. And you can back-end it out to see all the other user stories that hit those files. That's one way you might want to do it, because when you do that, you can find kind of an impact to doing a major change. You want to change that first requirement. Here's all the code you may have to change. What other requirements might that impact? So there's a way to do that. Let's go in here a little bit more. Notice that past is purple. Let's at least right-click, format that data series, and fill it with a reasonable color. If it's past, we probably want to make that green. And for our failures, which are blue, let's change those, format that data series to be red. And we got one more in here, which is never run. And I'll format that data series to become some kind of gray. So now we've got this report. And this report gives us some pretty decent information. Now, what can you get out of the cube? You can get a massive amount of data out of there. And the data can be used in positive ways or negative ways. And I want to have just a moment to talk about how not to use the data. Don't use it to evaluate individuals. Well, so-and-so checked in 20 times as much code as you did. Therefore, you're fired. No, or you get a bonus because you fixed more bugs. And why don't you do that? It destroys your teamwork. It stops people from collaborating with one another, from working with one another. It's a dangerous way to use metrics. I'm going to give you a danger that goes up, and it's not just metrics, it's TFS in general. TFS gathers a lot of data. And I've been in organizations where they've had, the top levels have tried to implement various policies. And some of those policies are horrible, horrible ideas, right? But by the time they filter down to the actual development teams, they're basically ignored, right? And everyone just kind of makes up their reports to make everyone happy all the way up. With TFS, you no longer have the luxury, right? The data is there. It flows all the way up, and that can be dangerous if you're measuring the wrong metrics. So just a little metrics aside, when you're using TFS, you have so many metrics. Just be cautious. Implement them lightly at first. If they seem to be doing good things, then help by supporting that. If they seem to be doing bad things, back them back out. But don't do things in one big shot. It can be a little bit dangerous on the metric side. Okay, good enough for that. That is our area. We're going to use this again later because it's hard for someone to come in and open up Excel. It's not that hard, but it'd be really nice if they could just go to a web page and have it exposed from the web page. So we're going to be exposing this from the web page here in a moment. But before we get there, I'm going to open up Visual Studio and look at a query that I've got. I've got a query here that's going to show me all of my bugs. And if I edit this query, we can take a look at the column options. And the column options are basically what is displayed across the bottom. And I'm going to add a new one here. Let me add priority. And the reason I want to add priority is that when we generate reports, it'll generate them based on all of these fields that are in here. So we'll get special reports for priority, like priority trend reports. So let me click OK. And let me save it. Right-click All Bugs, and we're going to create a report in Microsoft Excel. And this is one of those things that, how many of you have used this? Less than half. For the rest of you, this is one of the easiest ways to start getting good reports. Just build a WCL query, a work item query language query, and then run it. And notice it pops up this little thing, hey, you want to build a report? Absolutely. And what I really want to do, let's open this up. And I want trending reports, and I want work items. I don't really care about the work item type. Why? It's all bugs. Right? I don't need to see a report on a trend of what different types of work items. But I'll do assigned to, state, and priority. Click Finish, and it starts to generate these reports for me. And I think it lays it out pretty nicely. It does the hard work of connecting to the cube and parsing out all of these pieces. If we step over to assigned to, we can see who is currently assigned work. It filters it by the top 10. You can change that because you're given this entire piece right down here. You can see Jeff Levinson's doing the most work. Woo, Jeff. And we can move over to state. We can see what state these bugs are in. Active, resolved, closed. What are they in? We can then look at the priority because we added that. Everything's priority 2 but 1. And then we can look at trending, assigned to trending. We can look at state trending. And we started out with a bunch of resolved. Now we've got some closed ones up in here and some active ones. And we can also trend priority. So you can immediately start seeing trends based on a WCL query, which before this didn't have any trending type stuff. Right? You had to actually go out and build it yourself. Any questions? Yes? Do I need to refresh this report to get current data? That is a great question. You can reopen it and refresh it. You can refresh it from the data pieces. Later on, in just a few minutes, when we're going to take one of these to host it in SharePoint, I'll actually show you how you can set it to auto-refresh on open. So it just auto-refreshes on every open. That answer your question? Good. Next question, right back there. Good question. Okay. I'm going to answer those two first, then I'll come back. So the first one, what was the first one? I'm just kidding. Where's the metadata for all this? So if I have the data, the work item fields, are they the same there as they are in the cube so I can dig them out and find them? Not necessarily. So when you're building a work item type, and you know what, I might just pop that up and show you because that's question 2. I'll just pop up and show you how that's done. In that second piece, when you're building a work item type, you can actually make it different in the cube than it is in your work item type. And there's a couple reasons for that. Sometimes you want to make them more expressive or more, I don't know, different names. By default, they're the same. Yeah, by default, they're the same. That's a great question. So you need to figure out how to do it from the relational database. Like if I have a field that I've added, how do I get it into the cube and get... I'm going to take a step out of the presentation for about 3 minutes to show you something because it does impact reporting. I'm going to attach and I'm going to open up a work item type from the server. And the one I'm going to open up, let me connect to it, is the bug that we're working in. So I'm going to open up that bug, and that bug will open up, and I want to add some kind of sizing metric on the bug maybe. It's reaching to the bug right now and opening it. By the way, I'm doing this in production. That's usually not the best approach. Sometimes you want to test it first, but for a demo, we'll do it right in production. This is called the Process Template Editor, and here are the fields, and I'm going to add a new field. And the new field I want to add is Northwest Cadence t-shirt size, just small, medium, or large. Right? It's a string. The reference name, sorry, don't need the NWC in that name. I just need t-shirt size up here. I'll put a space in, make it friendly. Help text, small, medium, or large. Not very helpful help text. And I can set up some rules, allowed values. Come on. Small, medium, large. Now, here's my problem. I've got this brand new field, and I want to get it into the cube. And that sounds like a really hard thing, like you need to know Business Intelligence Studio and all that stuff. Not a bit. Right here, there's a drop-down, reportable. I drop down and I say, I want it to be a detail. What that means is it goes from the transactional store, and it gets dropped into the data warehouse. And there it stops. I can also say that t-shirt size, I want you to drop in as a dimension. Starts at the transactional store, goes into the relational database, the data warehouse, and from the data warehouse, it goes into the cube as a dimension we can slice by. And then if it's a number, a numerical thing, like hours worked, you can set it as a measure. But I'll just leave that as a dimension, click OK. That's all I need to do. And it will automatically now, the next time the cube rebuilds, it will flow through all of the stages, and it'll end up in the cube, and I'll have access to that t-shirt size. And it'll have the nwc.t-shirt size. Did that answer your question? Was that a worthwhile diversion for everyone else? That's probably an important piece for that. Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to come back to you on 3, but I'm going to take one more question before I move on. By the way, I have time for questions. I've planned it to take questions throughout. So. Can a user or a contributor create these style reports, the Excel reports? Yes. There's only one type of permission that's needed, and that type of permission is data reader for the cube. So you need to go to the cube and grant data reader permissions, and then people can create those. That's it. Which, by the way, is an interesting behavior, right? It means that they have access to the cube, and everything goes into the cube. So that gives people, anyone with that permission can build the reports, but they can also see pretty much anything. You'd have to be more granular and create different groups if you wanted more granularity. Yes, let me jump over to this side for a bit. Bruce. Thank you very much. What if the columns, you do an auto-generated one or you build the cube yourself, and the columns are all out of order? That can be a problem, especially if you want it active, resolved, closed, and it comes back closed, active, resolved, all mixed up. When you have something like that, if you jump back into that Excel report, and I can pop up into this one that we built, you can see it's failed, in progress, never run, passed. If I wanted it in a different way, you can right-click, and then you can move that one to the beginning. So you see now it's in progress, failed, never run. So you can reorder them how you want to reorder those. That's a very good question. Thank you, Bruce. I'll take one more question before I move on. Right there. Can I push description? Can I push the description field? Another great question. What's your name? Jeff. Can I push the work item description to the cube? No. Not at all. The cube does not take text fields. It only takes string fields. And the reason is it's already pretty big and complicated. It would push too much in there. Now, that's the out-of-the-box question. If you wanted to build your own data warehouse adapter, that's a different animal. You can build your own data warehouse adapter and push it in there. Jeff, one last. How do you report with a work item description against the transactional store? And I hate to say that. There are times when you need to go against the transactional store for reporting. This is unfortunately recorded because that is not guidance from Microsoft by a long shot. But there are times when you need to go against the store. There are some views you can use inside of the transactional database. Make your own views, possibly, but be aware that it is highly tuned for performance. And unfortunately, if you could throw it off. If you create some kind of crazy query that runs all the time, it could throw off performance. So just be aware of that, but don't fear it. It's just not worth fearing. All right. Fingers crossed, folks. We are now going back to the place that some of you saw me very rapidly close and escape from, which is right here. Let me just close this down. Why even have the whole thing open? Let's keep it nice and clean. Oh! Unable to process this request. Wait a few minutes. I checked this just prior to walking in here. Unfortunately, it chose this time to rebuild the cube. I didn't shut down the cube. That could be the problem, or it could be something else. If I've waited, sometimes it shows up. I kind of figured that waiting this long in the presentation would show it up. However, we can still move forward and look at creating a dashboard. So I'm going to create a dashboard, and I want to create a new one. Let me jump into, for instance, the burn down dashboard or quality dashboard. I can pick one of the dashboards, and I can copy that dashboard page. And I showed you the quality dashboard to start with. And this is going to be our user story status, maybe. And we'll call it user story status. And we'll copy that dashboard. That gives us another dashboard, which also doesn't work right off the gate. But again, you've seen those reports working on this machine. So you'll have to bear with me while we go in and make some changes now. I'm going to edit this, slide up here and make some edits, because what we want to do, let me just explain. I want to take these Excel things that I've built, these really nice Excel reports, and I want to expose those Excel reports on the portal itself. I want people to be able to just see them when they go in. I want them to pop up, see them, visualize them, away they go, and they can run with them. So that's my goal. That's where I want to get to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this page. And I'm going to blow away some of these web parts that I don't want. Delete that web part. We'll delete several of these web parts. So I'm just cleaning up the web parts. That may be enough if we remove them from row 1. And then we're going to add a web part in. And here are the web parts you can add. There's several of them that tie directly to Team Foundation Server. Let me show you some of those. If we scroll to the bottom, here's some of the Team Foundation Server web parts. These are out of the box, not Excel report ones, just the ones that are there. Completed builds, you can see all of your completed builds. Go to work item web part, new work item shortcuts, project portal links, etc. Work item summary. All of these are pretty good ones to have access to. I'm going to scroll up, however, and go to business data. And there's one here called Excel Web Access. Now, I want to stop and clarify. I'm now building something that only runs against SharePoint Enterprise, 2007 and 2010. SharePoint Enterprise does not come free with Team Foundation Server. It's an extra cost that you have to incur. But if your organization already has it, you can simply point out to it and hook it up. So we can take this Excel Web Access piece and we can add that piece to one of our rows. Let's put it back in row 1. Let's add it. And it connects right up here, but it says you need to connect it to an Excel workbook. Now, what I need to do is prep Excel to make this happen. So I'm going to go back to our creation. This is the one we created. And if you'll remember it, we have to prep it so we can get it up there. So I'm going to take this one, and in Data, under my connection properties, I'm going to refresh data when opening the file. So did that come back and answer your question? And what was your name? Greg? So Greg's question was, how do I get it to refresh every time? That'll do it. That'll refresh it every time you open it. You can also do it every 60 seconds. I wanted to wait. You want to do this setting so it refreshes every time people view it on the SharePoint site. So let's refresh it. Click OK. And next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the chart itself. We go back in. Take this chart, go to, there it is, my chart layout, and give it a name other than chart 1. So we'll call this the user story to test runs. No, user story tests. We'll keep it simple. And I'm going to write it down. I suggest you do too. And you'll see why in a moment. So user story tests, that's set. Let me save it one more time. Now we're going to go back to File. Now we haven't saved it yet. So let's save it as rec status or user story status. We'll drop that on the desktop, save it. Just so we have a local copy as well. But now we're going to go to Save and Send. And we need to prepare it for hosting out on SharePoint. So I'm going to prepare it for hosting out on SharePoint. So save to SharePoint, publish options, and instead of publishing the entire workbook, select items in the workbook, and I want user story tests. This isn't why I wrote it down. We'll still get to that part. So you're going to say, this is what I want exposed to SharePoint. Click OK. And then we want to save that on the site. So let's save it. And it goes out to my sites, logengine.net, and there is a reports document library. This is automatically created for you. There's lots and lots and lots of other reports in here. So I'm just going to drop mine in here, user story status, and save it on the portal. Yay. There it is up on the portal. Now we have to host it. And I'm going to host it by going back to my web part. Click here to open the tool pane to make some edits. Scroll over to the right, and there's a couple changes we need to do. What is the workbook you want? Click on it, and we're going to pick out the workbook we need. And that'll be under Excel Reports, and we called it User Story Status. Okay. And here's our named item. And if you push the little build button, what you would expect it to do is go find out what they are, but no, it's just a text box. So this is why you've written it down. User Story Tests. And click OK. It'll grab that piece. Let's not auto-generate the web part title. And we can make a couple of other changes here as well. If we scroll down to Appearance, if you want it to be standard with all the other ones, by the way, get rid of the toolbars and all of those pieces. That just makes it look like all the other ones that Microsoft has put up there for you. And under Appearance, you can give it a name like User Story Tests. Apply that to our page. And now we get to see our user story test, which is unfortunately the same error message. This error message is not the problem of either SharePoint or of Team Foundation Server. That's an error of my own configuration against this, to allow it to rebuild the cube and to use up some of the, maybe too many of the processes. Once again, just prior to walking in, working, not so much now. However, I'll click OK, and we're going to stop editing this page, and I'll take you there vicariously by kind of drawing the images with my hands. This is what it looks like. Just like that. Woohoo! So if I cut and paste, we could do some handle work. Cut and paste it into PowerPoint, and there we are. All right. Now we've uploaded that to SharePoint. Unfortunately, we can't see it, but it's still uploaded. And I'm going to come back for your third question. Oh, it's a new question. What was your name? Ronan. Ronan. Thanks, Ronan. That's a wonderful question. Where do you manage security for these dashboards? And how do you hook those together? You use the single sign-on functionality that's baked into SharePoint Enterprise to do all of that work for you. And you create a single sign-on service, and then you link the two together, and that's what you use to gather those reports and generate the reports. And then give people permission to the service, basically. I won't dive into that deeply because there is an exceptional tool on CodePlex that you just download and double-click, and it just configures it for you. It's the SharePoint configuration for TFS. So thank you very much. Yes?
Is there a way you can, say, disconnect we have partners who want this kind of information, but we don't want partners enough to let them access our TFS directly? Well, it'd be nice to have those reports. We have SharePoint loaded somewhere else. We can impersonate a user that has access to TFS to keep these reports updated and not allow their signal.
What was your name? Kent. Kent asks a very common question. What do I do if I have users who want to see the data, but I do not want to give them access to Team Foundation Server? No creating bugs in my project, none of that stuff. Yes, the SharePoint site, in this case, is connecting straight to the cube. So all you need to do is add that user to the reader group of the cube. They have to have nothing else in TFS. They don't have to have any access to TFS whatsoever. Just that cube. Now, licensing is a different animal. I'll just say that. I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to go down that path. Once I open up that can of worms, our remaining 22 minutes will be gone. Yes, as long as it's not licensing.
It's not like
All right.
we're going down that path. If you have enterprise managed metadata process you're trying to use, and you pull the reports out of TFS like that, you generate your Excel report, and build a publisher, are you still able to manage that metadata you're expecting on, say, your reports repository or something like that?
What metadata are you talking about?
Well,
Before I
let's
then I'll.
just say these reports are coming out, we want to make them public in our enterprise, and we have some content type we really want to associate with that. That's going to expect some additional inputs.
Yes. So the question is, and I'm going to rephrase it, and I hope I get it right. Let me know if I don't. But as an enterprise, we want to take this and encapsulate it with some additional metadata. We'd like to put it in a SharePoint content type. And that way other people can simply create things of that content type, and it handles some of the additional metadata, maybe workflow, maybe publishing, all the stuff you get with the beauty of SharePoint. Yes, you can drop these pieces into there. And it's not too difficult. One more question, and we'll go on to the next piece. Yes? So the question was, and this is a really important question, which is how do I find out what's available? There are a lot of fields in TFS. I think there's 190 out of the box fields with the 2 process templates that ship. You add another process template, you're probably up to 250 if you add the Scrum one. You add Conchango's Scrum or Scrum for Team System. You add that makes it like 300 and some. It can be a lot of fields. They've done something nice in 2010. If you open up the form in Visual Studio and float your mouse over not the field itself where you enter data, but the label for the field, it gives you a tooltip. And that tooltip now includes the name of the field. That's the first place you might look to kind of explore that. The second place is to go and get the power tools. And I'm just going to drop over where I was before because I think I still have it open. And you can open up a work item type from the server, and this will show you all of the fields that are available here. And it's got all of the metadata with it. And how do I get there? Once again, I installed the power tools with the process template editor, and I go to the process editor, work item types, open it from a file or from the server, and it'll show me all of these work item types. Yeah, there are certain permissions. Thank you very much. Chris Adams in front says, are there permissions related to that? And yes, there are. So you need the appropriate permissions. I don't know what those are. I think it's Team Project Collection, something like that, to be able to make that change, to open that up. But you can always have somebody else download it for you and hand you the things. You can open them from the file. The next place I want to go is handling reports, the SSRS reports, the SQL Server Reporting Services. And a lot of people say, why even bother with SQL Server Reporting Services? I've got Excel, I've got SharePoint. Why would I want anything else? And the reason you might want the reporting services ones, like when I first did the demonstration and pulled those out, because those can be subscribed to. You can handle in and just say, I want to subscribe to this. Email me a PDF copy of this every Friday morning. I want to look at it. Every Monday morning when I come in, show me all the things. So you can subscribe to them. They can be cached. There's all sorts of other wonderful things. The difficulty is they're relatively, sometimes can be difficult to create. Unless you use something like Report Builder 2.0 or Report Builder 3.0, depending on which version of SharePoint or SQL Server you're running. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to walk through a chart wizard. And I'm going to create that same report that we've created before, but I'm going to create it instead as an SSRS report. So we're going to create a new data source connection, and we're going to tie that to analysis services. Hey, just a moment. There we go. From here, we do much the same thing as we've done before, is we can make those changes and get those things populated. So we can go up here and change, and we want to look, for instance, at work items, and filter those to work items linked, which is once again, and here, again, I understand your pain. There are a lot of these reports, and it does take some time filtering through these and just to kind of get an understanding of what you're doing. So we're going to take the work item type and drop it up here. We're going to take the iteration path and drop it up here. These are the 2 dimensions that we're going to be using. And then we simply drag in our measures. Well, first let's set this to user story. Let's set this one to our second iteration. And then we want our work item title, and we want from test result, and I'm just running the same one that we ran in last time, right? Test result, we want the outcome. And lastly, we want our measure point trend. Point count trend. And now here we have all of our the data that we had before. Click Next. We'll build a bar chart using the stack chart. Next. We're going to move the outcome to the series, the point count trend to the sum, the title to categories. Click Next. Let's use that one and finish. Maybe blow it up a bit and call this user story tests. At that point, we can run it, see what it looks like, and we have that same report. I'm not going to dive into changing all the colors because you can just change the colors yourself. It's just as easy as it was before, right-clicking. And from that point, we can save it. And where do we want to save it? We're going to save it at TFS Reports, and I'll go into blogengine.net, and I'm just going to put it right at the base, which is our users story tests. Save it. Go back to our report manager. We have our user story tests available. We can open it up and view it. Now the nice thing is people can come in, they can change it, they can modify it, they can open it themselves up in Report Manager, make changes to it as well. Very, very fast using Report Manager if you know what you're looking for. When you start adding parameters and doing drill downs, you'll definitely want to be here. You can't do drill downs with Excel quite as easily. In a moment, I'll show you how to do that, or Jeff will show you how to do that. Last questions. Jeff, do you want to come set up for does it work? Awesome. Yes, I'll take your questions once again. Ronan. Yes. Yeah, so if you have the CMMI templates, it comes with its own reports. If you have a custom one, you get a different story. You have to go in and open those reports up, and then on the defaults, it'll say, like I showed you at the original, the bug type, you could change it to defect. There's also some other things that are underneath it, which say things like active state. And you can put whatever state. Your state might be in development. Resolved state, in test. Unfortunately, they only give you 4 states to work with. If anybody wants an example of how to do multiple states, I have a cumulative flow diagram, a remaining work report, that will handle up to 19 states, and it will sort them all appropriately and lay them all out. If you're interested in that, feel free to shoot me an email, and I will get that back to you. Here's my email. Let me hit previous here. It's right there, stephen.borg@nwcadence.com, and I'll happily send that report out to you guys. Anybody who wants it. Yes, Paul. Can you take a measure and treat it as a dimension? You cannot. I'll go there. La 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 la. I don't. Not going there. Yes. I'll just redirect you to your Microsoft licensing agent to talk to them. And no more questions from you. I'm just kidding. Any other questions? I'll go right here first, and then Ronan, we can come back to you. You can switch over. Great question. What if I want to create a report that crosses multiple projects? It doesn't matter. When all the stuff we've done in Excel and reporting services, by default, it's all projects in all collections. You actually have to filter to get it down to which one you want to see. You want to see it across 3 projects? You just pick those 3, and it filters across 3. Very easy. And you can report across team project collections as well, which is a strength of the cube, or a weakness, depending how you look at it. All right. I'm going to do a quick guest presenter. This is Jeff Levinson, and he's going to take the next 5 minutes, if he can do it in 5, and walk through Performance Point, another tool to get it. I had to roll back to a previous snapshot to try to solve my problem that you all got exposed to. So Jeff has it set up on his machine. He's going to walk through one of those pieces.
Yeah.
It's yours.
I sort of have it set up on my machine. So I also had to roll back to a previous version to do a little magic here. So I am going to show you Performance Point. Interesting feature. I won't be using the Blog Engine project. I'll be using another project. So in SharePoint 2010 Enterprise, Performance Point is included out of the box. Once you have it and you have it configured, I'm not going to talk about the configuration of Performance Point because that's a little bit beyond this session here. But you simply go to the intelligence site and you run the dashboard designer, and Performance Point's drag and drop. And wow, this is being recorded, so when I tell them about that bug, somebody else is going to hear about it.
You got to tell them about the bug. You got to tell them about the bug.
So once you're in the designer, you simply connect up to a data source, which I've already done. It's the same data source that you've seen Steve connect up to. You just put in the server name, you put in the database, which is TFS analysis that you've seen before. You select the cube that you're connecting up to, and then you select some other items down below the screen that the screen resolution will not let me show you, nor will the designer. And you're good to go. You've got your data source hooked up and you can create your Performance Point content. The thing about Performance Point content is Performance Point lets you do KPIs. While you can do KPIs in Excel and you can do rudimentary KPIs in reporting services, you can do some really awesome KPIs in Performance Point. And you can also drill down through the data live. So what I'm going to start with, these are the different types of reports you can get up here: analytic, grid, strategy map, which is actually pretty cool. You do like a diagram in Visio, and then you can hook data up to your shapes and drill into it. It's pretty awesome. You can create KPI details. You can actually include reporting services and a couple of other different reporting types here. I'm going to go with the basic analytic chart, and I'm going to hook it up to the TFS data source. It's going to come up a second.
My apologies.
No, I grabbed your power cable.
I didn't need it.
Oh.
Sorry.
It's okay. Hopefully I won't die. Okay, so once you get here, the report's pretty simple. This is drag and drop to lay it out. We'll start off with measures. I want work item count. It's a pretty standard measure. Drop it into the bottom axis. It's still going to tell me I don't have any data at this point. It doesn't update here. The next thing is I want to actually look at my data. So I'll go into the dimensions over here. And interestingly enough, I think I was probably the first person on the planet to try and do Performance Point reporting off of TFS because I found a really big bug. I found a bug in TFS and Performance Point, which independently you actually don't see, but when you use together, you can't use. You'll notice when I look at the work item dimension here, none of the system fields are there, so I don't get a system.title, I don't get a system.id, none of that stuff. No assigned to, it's gone. Good news is Performance Point Service Pack 1 is coming out, and they have included a QFE because I was tired of doing this little workaround that I'm going to show you, if you happen to want to dive into Performance Point.
It's not a bad workaround.
It's not a bad workaround, but if you don't know about it, you will never find it. It took a while. So I'm going to grab the name of a team project just to get a series up here. You'll see I've got various projects, and they've got some work items with them. This is how Performance Point looks, and you can go ahead and dive into there and do some various little things here. Now, I want to show, for a particular project, I'll just use this ADS Classic 3.1. So I can select in here, drill down to, and I can go into work item, and select work item type. Now I have all my system fields back available to me. So when I drill into my work item type, now I've got a list of all the different work items that I have that are here. So this is kind of the basic report. To actually put this out on SharePoint, what you do is you create a scorecard. I'm sorry, not a scorecard, a dashboard. I'm not going to show you creating KPIs right now. That actually takes a little bit of time. So we've got a new dashboard. And I'm going to drop my report on top of it. And I'm going to deploy it out to SharePoint. Now this report, if you spend enough time working on it, if I had the blogengine.net application actually there, I could recreate the exact same reports that Steve has shown previously to this, but I'm just looking at this report in Performance Point. So this is a standard report. One of the benefits that you get out of Performance Point and kind of the deep information that's available to you is you can see here, I've got a task count of 23. One of the things that I can do live here is I can actually drill down to see other information about this. So I can actually come in here and say, well, that's great. I know that I have 23 tasks. What state are they all in? These are all unproposed for the most part because I haven't actually moved anything along the way. And even further than this, I can go into what's called a decomposition tree. And in the decomposition tree, I can actually drill down to additional information. I'm likely to find that all these things are assigned to me because I tend to do a lot of the work. Steve's my boss, by the way. That's why you saw everything assigned to me. So in case anyone was wondering about that. So I can drill down here into the work item, and I can, for example, see who all of these are assigned to. Okay, we assigned one to somebody else. And you can further then go through and drill down to additional items here, whatever it is that you happen to want to be able to see. So, for example, create a date. And you can keep drilling down through this. So this is kind of one of the powers of Performance Point. You can slice and dice this data differently, and you can also change the report view. So I was showing you a bar chart, but you can also change it into a grid and export it to Excel if you want. A lot of different things that you can do with Performance Point.
Thanks.
I'll let you finish.
Very much. Let me wrap up with just a couple things. I really want to just talk about the power of TFS to do just some pretty amazing things. And let me spin through to get to this. Here's an example of what a Performance Point looks like in production. You can see there, work in process. For anyone who attended my metrics talk, we talked about the reduction in work in progress across time. That's a report. You can see high work in progress dropping down to much lower work in progress. We have work item counts. These are the things that just expose. And all sorts of things like this are possible. And I'm going to leave it at that and ask you to do something for me. When you go back to your organizations, run your remaining work report. That's one report. It's just right out of the box. And if it looks like it makes sense, you're using work items and you're using, you're using work items at least. And you're using them properly. If it looks all messed up, chances are you're not using work items right. Do that one thing. Start down that road to using some of the reporting pieces. Then come back and look at the data. And let the data start to drive organizational change. There is no reason to build a report that doesn't provide business value. Only build reports that provide business value. If you build extra ones just in case, you muddy the waters and you start to let people get distracted. Keep it focused, very few reports that talk about your key metrics that are driving behavioral change. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for attending. I'll be up here for questions. I'll be up here for questions for a while as I wrap up, and when they kick me out, I'll come stand outside and answer more. Please fill out your evaluations. As speakers, it's absolutely critical we get your evals. I want to thank you all for attending. Good.